Well, thank you, Randy, for that introduction. Appreciate it. I'd like to welcome everybody to this presentation. We appreciate your time and attendance. Um, so again, this presentation is titled Distinctly Different. The topic is animal mitigation, which is if you're an engineering or technical person, in our experience, this topic doesn't usually rate very highly on most people's critical information list. We're not chasing sparks or dealing with resistances or things like that. We're simply trying to make sure that your assets are safe. And how do you do that? Um, we'll go through the presentation, but you'll see there's a lot of different ways to do it. Many of you probably have those experiences already. For those of you that know Critter Guard, welcome and thank you for your being a customer of the company. For those of you that don't know who we are, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction. So what we're going to try to cover in this presentation is these topics, specifically as it relates to animal outages. The American Public Power Institute Association ranks these sustained outages, and animal outages are the #2 cause, depending on where you are in the country. That tends to be animals tend to be the #1 event in the Great Lakes, upper Midwest area. In other areas of the country, they're up there, but they may not be #1. And followed right behind them in the animal category are birds. So those are the two major topics we're going to cover today. Specifically, there are many other animal events. We can get as crazy as trying to prevent monkeys off of power lines, which we've had success doing. We don't tend to have a lot of monkeys in the United States, but certainly overseas, that's an issue. So just by way of introduction, Critter Guard is a 20-year-old company. We've been doing this a long time with some of the largest utilities in the United States. Some of you, if you're with some of those utilities, for instance, American Electric Power, Duke Energy, Ameren in St. Louis, Entergy in the Gulf Coast, and many, many others around the country have been using our products in a very successful way to a simplified way, which is, for those of you that don't know, we'll explore what those differences are. And again, we'll talk about really for critters, specifically squirrels, but again, it could be raccoons, rats, snakes, any kind of crawling critter. And then birds are obviously, a big issue as well. And we want to introduce a new product to you today on what we're doing there. We'll talk a little bit about the testing and how that works and how you qualify and compare that. And then we'll summarize and have a Q&A session at the end of this. Just a little introduction on me, following on what Randy said. My name is John Sims. I'm the owner and president of the company. We bought the business in late 2016, made a number of significant changes in the structure of the company so that we could provide better service. Our supply chain drastically changed, so our ability to deliver in the same day or the next day went way up. So we have almost a 99% inventory management system where we can deliver for you on the spot, as opposed to, forcing the utility to have to store your own product. My background's chemical engineering. I'm no utility expert in that sense, but I've been around the process industry on a global basis, over 45 countries and counting, with long-term business development and technical training aspects in the energy sector. So I don't profess to be an expert on all things utility, but hopefully I can answer most of any questions you might have. So we'll get into the meat of the presentation here. Basically, what we want to try to do is to think about, if you've got animal problems, what's out there and how do you address it? So I've presented here what we call an array of choices. And you notice all of these different pictures. They're essentially, most of these products, not all of them, but most of them are plastic molded components. And they're designed to, specifically for the particular device that you're trying to protect. So you can see a wide range of these, and the varieties change based on how they mount or what size they are. Thermography and the care and feeding of your critical assets on a pole or in a substation are critical aspects of trying to specify these guards, because you care about what the temperature is going to be. You need to do that quickly. One of the problems with guards, this is very simple from the standpoint of an analogy, but every time a serviceman comes to your house to repair your washing machine or your dishwasher, they have to take off the guards to get to the critical equipment. Do they always remember to put them back? Kind of up to the repairman. Well, the utility industry, in our experience, is not a whole lot different. I've talked to thousands of linemen over the years, and basically they all say, we hate all these things. Nobody likes putting up animal guards. But one of the things they like about our product is once you put it up, it doesn't get in your way. And we'll talk about that as we go along. So for all of these array of devices or components that you're trying to protect, they range from all of these listed here as well as many more, but each has a different size depending on what your distribution and or transmission system is rated for, what those sizes are, what those voltages are, how do you install it, are there local issues in terms of safety and access that you have to decide. So it can be a complicated thing for a utility to say, we've got a problem, where do we and how do we address it? And that's really where CritterGuard comes in. So these questions are things like, well, which ones of these should I use? Do I need different ones for different applications? How do I make it fit? Again, to our service point, how do you maintain it? Do I have to go back and clean it or take it apart and put it back on? Is this even the right guard for the problem I have? Those are issues. And one of the bigger ones that we hear over and over again is, well, yeah, we tried that, but all we did was make the problem worse. We just created another problem by trying to fix the problem. And we'll talk about some of those examples as we go along as well. So why are we different? CritterGuard doesn't go about the animal mitigation business the same way all of those other guys do. You generally can categorize animal mitigation by the guard people. And of course, guard is in our name. It's in our company name, CritterGuard. It's also in our product names, pole guard and line guard. But in fact, what's different about us is that we don't seek to cover or blanket or guard each and every type or size of device. We took the approach of, well, what's common among all of those different devices? And that commonality is the conductor itself. So the line, the powered conductor. So that the animals use that conductor. We've all seen it, whether it's in your own backyard or whether it's on an overhead line. The animals use that conductor as a highway. To them, it's a way to get from wherever they are to where they want to go. Well, why do they want to go there? Well, for the most part, at least in the case of squirrels, they're simply curious. But it may be something a lot more practical than that. Build a nest, create, find food, bring food back to the nest, all of those, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, clothing, shelter. Animals are the same way. They need to get someplace to get warm, and the warmth and the buzzing or anything like that is a means to attract them. So it makes them curious to try to figure it out. So you've seen them, they can go quickly and easily across a conductor. So we've begun to think of the conductor as the highway, and no different than the road crew building a highway on your way to work. They'll put up the blockade on the highway, sometimes miles ahead of where the bridge outage is, so they can get you to move over or go a different way. So you don't have to block the bridge itself. You basically block the highway so they go around it. And that's essentially what we do with line guard. We force the animal to go a different direction so they can't even get close to where the critical device is. So we call it a highway, and the conductor could be a highway. Another type of highway is the power pole. So the power pole is simply an access point from the ground up to the overhead access. And so once they figure that out, they go with ease. And then you have, okay, if they get up there and they're on those lines, now you sort of have no choice but to try to block those devices. Well, so our attitude is if you block those highways, they can't even get there. And that's what's been working for years and years. So the number one product we want to talk to you about is something called Line Guard. We'll go into detail on what that is, but Line Guard is more or less a universal solution for overhead assets. In other words, one Line Guard system, one size, one definition is sufficient for just about every overhead conductor that you currently use, whether it's a low voltage overhead access line at 110 volts, 120 volts, or whether it's a high voltage three-phase line with a neutral and grounding and everything else. Whatever that conductor is, whether it's insulated or not, Line Guard will work on it. Because again, what we're doing, the name says Line Guard, but in fact, we're not actually guarding the line. We're not protecting the line, because even though we know squirrels, as an example, I don't know how many of you know this, squirrels are related to beavers. If they don't chew on something, their teeth will grow up to 9 inches in 1 year. That's a trivia contest. You can win that challenge next time it's played. So, but yeah, they'll grow up to 9 inches in a single year if they don't chew and chew down the length of their teeth. So they'll chew on everything. They're not necessarily chewing to eat, but they're chewing to keep their teeth short. And so in the process, people have said, well, they're chewing on the line. Yes, they will do that. But in 20 years, I've not heard really anybody come back and say that they've had line issues because the line itself was chewed. So the real value of the system is to really guard the asset on the line. Well, where do you do that? Well, you can do it anywhere on the line between where they come on the line and where your device is. The design is such that it's unique in the market, that it actually moves or spins when an animal engages it. So as a curious animal comes down the line, he sees this thing and he can't quite figure it out. And as soon as he touches it, out of that curiosity, it moves on him. And now he's really confused, because that's not what he's expecting. And it could actually make him go upside down if he gets really aggressive. So we'll take a look at what we're talking about. Hopefully many of you have seen these out in the real world. If you haven't, it's time to start. This is our #1 product seller, Line Guard, and you can see it's a spinning set of rollers. Now they don't spin by default. They sit on the line completely unobtrusive until the animal engages it from one end or the other. And so if they come in and the jump wheel is what we call on the outside, the jump barrier. So that wheel is designed so they can see through it and make them think, oh, well, I can just keep going and I'll just crawl over that and keep going. Well, as soon as they put their paws on it and their weight, that wheel spins. The other thing you'll notice is that they're independent rollers. That's not just one roller. Like, for instance, a split piece of conduit that's 8 feet long, like typically used for a guy guard. You could do that, but the problem with a single roller is that almost every line has a droop specification to it. That droop is for water runoff and many other technical aspects that we don't need to get into. But when the line droops with a single roller across it, then it doesn't spin. The friction keeps it from spinning, which is not what you want. So the independent rollers are, of course, sort of similar to the game show. What is it, American Ninja Warrior or something like that, where the rollers go opposite directions. So when an animal gets his paws on it, first of all, it's very, very hard and slick. There's nothing to grab onto. They can't chew it. They can't get their claws into it. They simply want to use it as a way to get over it. But as soon as they put their paws on it, the roller spins and they're off of it, unless they're hanging on to the jump barrier wheel, in which case they work their way back on the line and go back the way they came. And typically that's what happens. No matter what the animal, this works for snakes, this works for rats, possum. Don't hear too many skunks on the line, but I have heard it's happened. But any kind of a crawling animal will get repelled by this system because they can't jump it. If they try to jump, that's why it's 5 rollers long, is that they usually can't clear that distance. And I've got some customers who literally say, we're going to put up some more rollers. That's fine too. You could put on as many rollers as you want, but at some point it gets kind of redundant. Our standard system is 5. We've had great success with that. So that's Line Guard. And you can see also some of the detail, the mounting system. There are lots of different ways to mount the system. We have a standard system that we offer, but there are alternatives and options as well. Again, sometimes based on local standards, other times based on just customer preference, and other times based on whether it's going to be installed in a de-energized situation or an energized situation. Both can be accommodated. So where would you put Line Guard? And the answer is just about anywhere. #1, especially based on critical factors, substations seem to be the #1 choice of all of our utility customers. Almost every substation has a risk of overhead access. Everybody uses fences. That's a requirement. So we got a chain link fence, depending on the level of sophistication, electrified or not, that keeps 2-legged animals, that's us, as well as 4-legged animals from accessing the substation from the ground. Many of them have footers and keep them from digging underneath. But there's almost nothing for an overhead roof. How do you put a roof on a substation? So we call it a virtual roof, because the overhead feeder lines are the highway to allow any of these animals from outside the substation to get into the substation. And they'll work their way down the lines, down the poles, into the substation, create a nest, and be there for who knows how long until the worst happens. So that's really one of the #1 places to use line guard, but obviously many other places as well. Guy wires, overhead cross arms, pole mounted equipment, any number of things where you have critical access equipment that you do not want to risk a flashover event caused by an animal. Blocking the highway is the way to do that. So you can install that anywhere on the line between where the animal might get on it, which might be a tree, it might be a building, it might be some other structure where they can jump off and get on the line, or it may be a power pole where they climb the pole and get on the line. You put the line guard anywhere on that line. In other words, you're not putting it over the device. It doesn't have to be right next to the transformer. It doesn't have to be right next to the cross-arm insulators. It can be many feet away from that, and it can be staggered in the case of a three-phase line. They don't have to be, as you saw in the previous picture, they don't have to be right next to each other. It's simply a blockade. So you have a lot of flexibility as to where to put it. And as I mentioned, we have most of our customers that use a de-energized install just simply for a standard safety precaution. Some customers, though, don't have the redundancy in place, so they can't de-energize. And so we have a few that still put them up hot, and that can be done as well with proper gloving. This is a snap system. The tools required to install it are quite simple, either by hand for the rollers, and then the clamping system is depending on what kind of mounting mechanism you need, whether a hot stick is needed or not. But normally lineman's pliers is sufficient for the entire install. And so on a per line basis, we're talking 10 to 15 minutes and you're done. And again, the benefit being that you don't have to go back and maintain it or service it. We've got these systems in use in hot, miserable, rainy, snowy, icy conditions for 20 years and counting with no service needed. So yeah, it's a very very useful system. The rollers, you see, they're a conical shape, and those rollers can actually be cut back. So if you had, for instance, like a triplex line would be more like a bundle, a cable bundle, as opposed to an individual conductor, but it still works fine. Those roller openings can be cut back with a simple chop saw, just shaving off 1/4 inch or even as much as 1/2 inch on each end of the rollers before they're installed will open that up to support up to a 3-inch cable bundle. And again, then you fasten it to the line using, you know, your choice of clamps or the ones that we supply with the system. We have installations up to 77 kV that we know about. Unfortunately, we ship product, well, fortunately, we ship product all over the world, and many times through some of the large electrical distributors. So sometimes we don't know where it's actually being used. The only way we'd know is if somebody called to complain, which we get very few of. And so we don't actually know every place where it's installed or what the application was, but we do know that it's used at least up to 77 kV, which is beyond what normal distribution voltages would be. Second product, we call it pole guard. And again, it's a generic name, but in this case, we really are guarding the pole. We don't let the animal even go up the pole. So the pole is the highway. And for any pole mounted equipment that's on top up with the cross arms, whether it's in a substation or whether it's a standard distribution type power pole, where you have animal issues, through, as an example, throughout the city of St. Louis, the neighborhoods of St. Louis is where I'm from, have some background there. You can go through a number of the different metropolitan areas and look up, and you'll see line guards installed all over the town because there's trees everywhere. And as opposed to having to continue to either cut down trees and manage the right of way, they put up line guard systems and the animals just went elsewhere. So they don't have outages in that situation because it's a much more effective way to go after vegetation management. It saves them a ton of money on that. Again, what happens is it's a blockade, and so the animal has to come at it from underneath. And as they do that, they can't get over the spinning roller, so they just give up. So other pole wraps, and you've seen a lot of these pole wraps on power poles, they can be effective, but many of those get jumped as well. A squirrel will just go right through it. So you see an example here. This actual one's from the UK. This was an H-frame pole, and you can see that the plates, again, much like the concept that we use with line guard with the jump barrier, the plates have a bunch of holes in them, and those holes are actually designed as almost like a trap, so the animal can see through it and go, well, I can keep going. Well, when he does that, he's going to get his claws in those holes, and it's going to force him to the outside of that system. And then those rollers spin. They're the same rollers used in line guard. They're smooth and hard. They can't get their claws in them. They can't get over it from an upside down position. That's why the blockade's effective. Also, we've gotten a little fancy in the last number of years. You can see that that's not a wooden power pole. That's a steel power pole. We have a different mounting system for that. You can also see that we've got modifications available for conduits or risers. These tend to be custom situations, but this particular site, one is a pretty large utility in Texas on the left. The one on the right is the Nashville Water Service. They had issues that no one could solve. Critter Guard solved them. So that's an example for you. And then another example with pole guard. This is we're proud of this one. I didn't show the whole picture, but this is South Africa. We keep monkeys off of the distribution line in the mines. You may know that South Africa is a huge mineral resources area. Miles and miles of overhead lines servicing the mine workers down below. They have redundancy built into all the systems, but they can't keep the monkeys off the line. Once they started using pole guard and line guard, that stopped that. Their pole was a concrete pole with that profile. And so they're a standard customer now for that. So we do things like that for people all the time. So now we're going to take a little bit of transition, and instead of talking about crawling critters, say, well, how do we handle birds? Because birds are, no joke, a different animal altogether. There's obviously we call them raptors. These are birds of prey. The hawks, the owls, the ospreys, the typically large birds with large wingspans that hunt individually and use high perches to oversee their hunting ground, versus flocks of birds, regardless of type. So there's lots of different ways to approach that, but in our feedback from most customers, none of them are really great. So we've just introduced a new product this year with some success already called BirdBloc. As we've said there in the third line, BirdBloc is not a mechanical solution. It's not a cover or a cage or something like that. It smells. It has a smell to it. That smell is safe for us, for hanging it, for working with it. It's approved by the EPA. I've got all the documentation for that, but the birds hate it. Turns out that all birds have a fairly well-developed olfactory sense. They have nasal passages that go right up into their brain. And when they smell this material, they don't like it. So if they're already nesting someplace like a substation and you don't want them there, you can remove the bird without having to deal with it. All you have to do is get rid of the nest and get rid of the feces to begin with, which many of our utilities are already doing as a normal operational maintenance. Clean it up, but then they come back. Well, not with BirdBloc. Once you hang it up, they don't come back. And if they come back for the next day and they smell it again and they're like, oh, this is terrible. It gives them a headache and they leave and then they don't come back. The scent has been developed so that we can make it last up to 4 months, even in outdoor conditions. And it works with many, many different kinds of bird species, pigeons, starlings, hummingbirds, you name it. I will say that it's slightly different. We need to work with you on, what the actual situation is, because smaller birds, especially when there's huge flocks, can be more challenging than larger birds. Larger birds work very effectively. And again, it's safe for the humans and the environment. And it doesn't kill birds. There's no dead birds. So the reporting issue of a dead bird goes away. We have 2 formulations of that. The granular formulation is a stronger scent initially. These can be hung. They're small bags. You can see about 2 ounces. You hang it literally anywhere, and it stinks. And the birds don't like it. They will not come back. So let's say they're roosting over the top of a bus bar, or let's say they're nesting in a crevice of a substation. You can get rid of those with this product without having to cover or engineer a specific product for that. Then the second formulation is the press blocks. The press blocks are not as strong initially. It's the same scent, but it's designed for a time release, so that scent of the blocks will last up to 4 months without you doing anything to it. That's enough time. So as a bird tries to come back, especially during nesting season, which in the US is typically in the early spring, those birds might come back because they're used to staying there. They're used to having a nest there. Once you hang BirdBloc, they don't want to come back, and they will go find someplace else, which is all you care about. The alternative is to things like spikes. We say yikes because almost everybody I've talked to about spikes, they're like, yeah, we're not sure about those things. And in fact, the linemen are like, no, we hate those things. So depends on who you are. Foggers work, but they don't last. It's a very short scent. Again, it's typical like ours, but the fogger won't last a day. The next day, the birds are back. We've had customers use noisemakers, poppers, they call them. Again, that's not satisfactory. There's a number of suppliers for diverters. Diverters do work depending on the application. But again, it's very, very specific. And relocation is another one. We have a customer just a couple of months ago that said, we've been working with ospreys. They're a real danger to us in our generation station. It's a nuclear generator. And we've relocated the nest multiple times. They just keep coming back, and they come back in greater numbers. So it's like we're building them free homes. And so that doesn't really work either. Lasers are the topic du jour. We've got several customers that have tried lasers. Obviously, the price tag is pretty extensive. That's why I listed it with specially engineered structures. You could hire a bunch of architects and design, in the case of the nuclear facility, a special building to keep birds out, but that's years of design and engineering, and there's no guarantee that's going to work either. So the BirdBloc is really a convenient way to do this, and it works in a lot of areas. Just some examples: substations, and I'll show you some pictures of that. Overhead lines or cross arms, especially where bus bars are or any other sensitive device down below, transformer pads, where the birds will roost overhead. and then crap down below. That crap, as we all know, is acidic and pervasive, and over time creates both maintenance as well as OSHA related headaches. No longer needed. You can install BirdBloc over the top of that, and the fumes and the vapor, while your service people will notice it, it won't hurt them, but the birds can't stand it. They'll leave and go nest someplace else. Depots and warehouses, like high bay ceilings. Here I'm in the Wichita area. A number of the warehouses and depots for service centers, they're loading up supplies every morning for the crews, and the birds just fly in there. And so we put up BirdBloc, and they're gone now. No birds in the garages, no pooping on the trucks, no pooping on the tools. So that's a nice thing as well. Here's some examples. So you can see on the left, this is the nuclear generation station. That transformer that we see the edge of there, that's a 500 kV transformer with gas-filled phase conductors at the top. You don't see the connectors from this photograph, but we hung the BirdBloc bags down below it so the vapors waft upwards and the birds are gone. On the right-hand side is a smaller substation. Again, it's a generation substation, gas-fired generator, and transformer pads below. And you see the normal, very typical animal guards, the round 14, 16-inch diameter bushing guards that are pretty ubiquitous in most substations. That device created the nesting opportunity for the bird right behind where the overlap of those two guards are. So that created a very nice, safe place for a bird to make a nest, which, guess what? Then when they had eggs, attracted the coon. They had a near miss that cost almost $1 million in that substation. Putting these BirdBloc bags, you can see they're hanging it hot. Safety regulations, they can't get closer than so far, and those are just the support structures. But by hanging them close enough all the way around the substation, the smell permeated the whole area. This season, not a single bird. The guys are there every day making sure. It's like, you know, they're there every day anyway, but it's like, you see any birds? Nope, haven't seen a bird all season. So they love it. And then we'll move along to the last part here about product specs. We do a lot of testing on these products. All the physical, thermal, mechanical strength is there. I did want to bring out, because we see this request a lot about ASTM testing with 1656. You notice that test is designed for systems up to 38 kV. But we would point out, our customers, most of our big utilities, do not apply these test standards to Critter Guard, specifically because of, number one, how long we've been out in the market, and number two, because of how we're applied. We don't actually cover those devices. So again, I mean, for UV testing or thermal testing, we've got a lot of experience with that. And I'll just make the point here with this last slide. If you compare what that standard is for, the picture on the left, with guards that might actually overlap or touch the energized part, with how line guard is installed on the right, it's not touching anything. And in fact, line spacing standards are still met. So the test doesn't actually apply for line guard. So just be aware of that when you specify this with the 1656 standard. We use that standard as a guide, as a base for all of our testing, but there are people that will argue that it's not appropriate, and this is why. So in summary, appreciate your time and attendance, and look forward to any questions you have.
The pole guard, can it be used as a barrier to protect outbreak of fire?
That's a good question. The argument is if you're trying to protect like a forest fire in California, you have to go back to what's the ignition source. If you have a roaring fire already from a forest fire, then these are plastic products, and unfortunately their flame temperature is not going to survive a fire. So it's not a fire block or a fire stop. However, if the issue is I want to prevent an animal from creating a flashover event that would ignite a fire, the answer to that is yes. That's precisely how it's used in many applications throughout California and the West Coast is in that case. In fact, we've even got retirement communities that have gone around some of our favorite well-known utilities out there and ordering them specifically for their own communities just for that reason, to prevent animals up on the overhead lines creating sparks, flashover events, and other areas. Because once you put pole guard up, no matter the animal, could be a snake. We have Entergy as an example. Entergy and Duke Energy both use pole guard extensively to keep snakes from climbing to the top of the poles. And they do that, again, because they're looking for bird nests up there. And once they spark a flashover event, now you've got a fire.